what Japanese doctors tried to warn before they were silenced. The warning came not as a shout, but as a quiet, meticulous whisper from the highest echelons of Japanese medical integrity. It was a warning rooted in thousands of years of observational science, tradition, and profound respect for the human body. Yet it was a warning that fundamentally clashed with the tidal wave of global industrial progress, corporate ambition, and pharmaceutical expansion. These doctors, the silent guardians of one of the world's healthiest populations, saw the future clearly. They saw the creeping modernization, the adoption of foreign habits, and the systematic dismantling of traditional health frameworks. They tried to alert the world, but before their crucial message could take root, they were silenced. The method was subtle, almost surgical, not through violence, but through regulatory changes, funding cuts, media isolation, and the relentless marketing power of a system built on illness, not wellness. This is the story of what Japanese doctors tried to warn us about before they were silenced. In order to understand the depth of this suppression, we must first appreciate the unique status of Japanese medicine. For decades, Japan stood as a global enigma, a nation boasting the highest life expectancy and the lowest rates of chronic degenerative diseases in the developed world. This wasn't luck. It was the result of a cultural philosophy called washoku, a diet rich in fermented foods, seafood, and vegetables, combined with a holistic approach to life that prioritized balance, known as ikigai. Japanese medical professionals, particularly those operating outside the immediate sphere of Western influence, were masters of preventative care. They viewed the body as an ecosystem, not a machine to be constantly repaired with synthetic parts. They practiced kampo, a form of traditional Japanese herbal medicine developed over centuries, which often served as the frontline defense against illness. They weren't focused on managing symptoms. They were obsessed with eradicating the root cause. This distinction, the difference between healing and management, is the very core of the suppressed warning. The first major warning issued by these dissenting Japanese doctors was about the food revolution, or, more accurately, the nutritional catastrophe that was sweeping the nation. As Japan became a global economic powerhouse in the mid to late 20th century, it rapidly imported Western convenience and, with it, Western poisons. The doctors saw their traditional, nutrient-dense diet replaced by quick, hyper-palatable, and industrially processed alternatives. They identified two primary culprits: seed oils and artificial additives. Dr. Kenji Tanaka, a renowned gastroenterologist operating out of Osaka, was one of the earliest and most vocal critics. He noted a sudden, sharp uptick in inflammatory bowel diseases, autoimmune conditions, and widespread obesity, conditions that had previously been vanishingly rare. His research, along with that of his colleagues, pointed directly to the massive intake of polyunsaturated fats, specifically soybean oil, canola oil, and corn oil, which flooded the market as cheap alternatives to traditional fats like sesame oil and rice bran oil. Tanaka argued vehemently that these oils, often extracted using harsh chemical solvents and heated to high temperatures, were unstable, rapidly oxidizing inside the body and generating free radicals that led to systemic inflammation. He wasn't talking about small changes. He was describing a cellular-level war being waged by the very food source intended to sustain life. This wasn't just a concern about weight gain. The deeper warning was that chronic inflammation, fueled by these industrial oils, was the foundational precursor to almost every modern disease: heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and even neurodegenerative disorders like Alzheimer's. The Japanese medical establishment, steeped in preventative tradition, understood that gut health was central to total health. They watched, horrified, as the traditional biome-supporting diet of miso, natto, and pickled vegetables was pushed aside by refined sugars and chemically preserved packaged foods. The doctors warned that the human digestive system, refined over millennia to process natural, whole foods, was simply not equipped to handle this chemical onslaught. They published papers, they gave lectures, and they tried to interface with government regulatory bodies. But the economic forces behind the subsidized import of industrial food ingredients were too powerful. The profit margins of processed foods were immense, and the voice of preventative medicine, however scientifically sound, was drowned out by the marketing budgets of the giants of the food industry. The second, perhaps most crucial warning, involved the rising dependency on pharmaceuticals, a dependency that Japanese doctors felt was fundamentally unnecessary for many common ailments. Japan has long struggled to balance its ancient Kampo tradition with modern, highly profitable Western pharmacology. The dissenting doctors feared that their nation was being converted from a land of proactive healing into a market for reactive drug management. They argued that the emphasis on synthetic drugs was inherently flawed because it treated the signal, not the underlying sickness. Consider the treatment of hypertension, high blood pressure. In traditional Japanese medicine, hypertension was often seen as a symptom of lifestyle imbalances, excess salt, stress, lack of certain minerals. The treatment focused on dietary correction, stress reduction techniques, and targeted Kampo formulas. However, the Western model offered a quick fix, a daily pill, often a calcium channel blocker or an ACE inhibitor, designed to artificially regulate blood pressure. The Japanese doctors warned that while these medications provided immediate symptomatic relief, they often failed to address the systemic causes, meaning the patient remained reliant on the drug for life, masking the need for deeper lifestyle changes. Dr. Hiroshi Sato, an internist from Tokyo who had trained extensively in both Eastern and Western methods, publicly challenged the concept of polypharmacy, the use of multiple drugs simultaneously, especially in the elderly population, which is massive in Japan. He showed data indicating that the side effects of compounded medications were often mistaken for new diseases, leading to the prescription of yet more drugs in a dangerous spiral. He called it the iatrogenic trap, illness induced by medical intervention itself. He warned that this shift was not merely a change in treatment modality, but a fundamental change in patient mindset. People were being taught to rely on external chemical interventions rather than internal biological resilience. Sato's clinic showed dramatic results using personalized lifestyle interventions and traditional medicine, often resulting in patients reversing chronic conditions and weaning off drugs. But this model of complete reversal, of achieving true health independence, was commercially devastating to the pharmaceutical companies. The system demands consumers, not healed individuals. When Sato attempted to publish his longitudinal studies showing the superiority of integrated care over pure pharmacological management for conditions like type 2 diabetes, he found publication avenues mysteriously blocked. Funding for research into Kampo and traditional preventative methods began to dry up, channeled instead into drug trials and research focusing on patentable synthetic compounds. The warning was clear: profit over prevention. The third and perhaps most sensitive warning concerned environmental toxicity and the integrity of essential resources, specifically water and air quality, viewed through the lens of genetic and epigenetic vulnerability. Japan, being a densely populated, highly industrialized archipelago, faces unique environmental pressures. The dissenting doctors focused heavily on industrial runoff and the contamination of the marine food chain, a critical part of the Japanese diet. They were not just concerned about heavy metals like mercury, which is a known hazard in seafood. Their advanced research focused on endocrine-disrupting chemicals, EDCs. Substances like phthalates, BPA, and certain pesticides, which mimic hormones and subtly derail the delicate signaling systems of the human body. Dr. Emi Nakamura, an environmental health specialist, sounded the alarm about the widespread use of plastics and chemical coatings in food storage and household goods. She warned that continuous low-level exposure to EDCs was rewriting the genetic code, or rather affecting the expression of that code, across generations. The Japanese doctors' unique perspective here was that they saw the effect on fertility and child development decades before their Western counterparts acknowledged the link. Nakamura highlighted a disturbing rise in developmental disorders, reproductive issues, and certain cancers that tracked closely with industrialization and the influx of synthetic chemicals into the environment. Her core warning was terrifying. We are not just polluting our planet. We are polluting our genetic future, undermining the biological continuity of our species. Nakamura's work was groundbreaking, meticulously detailing how EDCs in common household items and municipal water supplies could alter fetal development even at exposure levels previously considered safe. But safety standards, the doctors noted, were often set not by independent biologists, but by governmental bodies influenced by the very industries producing the chemicals. When Nakamura tried to push for stringent, scientifically rigorous safety standards based on biological impact rather than industrial feasibility, her lab faced severe scrutiny. Her funding was cut, and her findings were dismissed in mainstream media as alarmist, lacking in general consensus, the modern tool of suppression. This brings us to the mechanism of silencing. How does a scientifically robust group of respected professionals, deeply embedded in a culture of health, suddenly lose their voice? It happens systematically through the application of 4 distinct pressures: economic, regulatory, media, and institutional. Economically, the warnings were silenced because health prevention simply does not generate the same level of capital as chronic illness management. A cured patient is a lost customer. When Japanese doctors advocated for simple, low-cost, traditional solutions like diet modification, meditation, or specific herbal interventions, they were devaluing the high-cost, high-profit solutions offered by the global pharmaceutical and processed food industries. Regulatory silencing was achieved by redefining acceptable practice. Modern medicine, globally, operates under standards of care largely dictated by Western frameworks. In Japan, efforts were made to marginalize Kampo and holistic approaches, classifying them as alternative or unproven, even though they had millennia of successful use. This regulatory shift mandated that if a treatment wasn't supported by large-scale, often industry-funded randomized controlled trials, RCTs, it couldn't be widely taught, practiced, or reimbursed by insurance. This effectively starved traditional and preventative medicine of the financial support needed to conduct the expensive RCTs required for official validation, creating a perfect catch-22. The media played a crucial role. Any physician like Dr. Tanaka or Dr. Sato who spoke out against industrial food practices or pharmaceutical dependency was quickly labeled a fringe element, a pseudoscientist, or a threat to public trust in official healthcare guidelines. Their message was minimized, twisted, or simply excluded from public discourse. Mainstream media became heavily reliant on advertising revenue from the very industries the doctors were warning against, creating a powerful financial incentive to maintain the status quo narrative that salvation lies in the next new pill or the next technological fix, not in behavioral change and traditional wisdom. Institutionally, those who dared to warn were isolated. Promotions stopped. Teaching positions were rescinded. Collaborative research opportunities disappeared. For a medical professional in Japan, where reputation and institutional hierarchy are paramount, this professional isolation was a deeply effective form of silencing. It sent a clear message to younger practitioners: stay within the established parameters or risk career annihilation. The system policed itself, ensuring that dissenting voices, however factual, were rendered powerless. If you are finding this exploration into hidden truths fascinating, please take a moment to hit the like button. It helps us bypass the very mechanisms of suppression we are discussing and ensures that this vital information can reach more people searching for genuine knowledge. Your support is crucial in bringing these silenced stories back into the light. Let's look closely at the consequence of ignoring the Japanese warnings. The data today serves as a damning validation of the doctor's initial fears. While Japan still maintains high overall longevity, the quality of those years is rapidly deteriorating. There has been a significant rise in lifestyle diseases. Previously, Japan was renowned for its low rates of Western cancers, but colon, breast, and prostate cancers, diseases strongly linked to processed food consumption and inflammatory diets, are surging. The rates of dementia and Alzheimer's, diseases that Dr. Tanaka warned were linked to dietary inflammation and chemical exposure, are now serious public health crises overwhelming the geriatric care system. The physical health crisis is mirrored by a psychological one. The rapid shift away from traditional community structures, the introduction of highly stimulating, chemically laden diets and environmental toxins have been linked by these ignored doctors to rising rates of stress, anxiety, and depression. The Japanese concept of ikigai, finding meaning and purpose, which once served as a powerful psychological buffer, has eroded under the constant pressure of modern consumerism and industrial pace. The silenced doctors had warned that disrupting the physical balance would inevitably disrupt the mental balance, as the mind and body are inseparable. One of the most profound areas of concern that was aggressively suppressed related to chronic fatigue and mitochondrial health. The Japanese medical tradition places immense importance on energy flow and vitality. Certain doctors recognized early on that the exposure to heavy metals, persistent organic pollutants, and the aforementioned industrial seed oils were directly attacking the mitochondria, the energy factories of the cells. Dr. Tetsuo Kobayashi, before his research institute lost its government funding, pioneered work suggesting that chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, and unexplained debilitating exhaustion were often symptoms of profound mitochondrial dysfunction induced by environmental and dietary toxins. He argued that the body was running on faulty fuel, industrial oils, while simultaneously fighting an overwhelming chemical war, leading to energy failure. His prescribed treatments involved rigorous detoxification protocols, nutrient loading, and specialized mitochondrial support, treatments that were cheap, effective, and fundamentally non-pharmacological. This non-pharmacological efficacy was his downfall. Kobayashi's data demonstrated that when patients were removed from the toxic environment and given the specific cofactors the mitochondria needed, CoQ10, certain B vitamins, magnesium, their energy levels returned. But this was an inconvenient truth. It suggested that many modern chronic illnesses were reversible through non-patentable natural means, directly challenging the narrative that only lifelong pharmaceutical management could keep these conditions at bay. Kobayashi's work was quietly removed from academic curricula, and the consensus shifted towards treating chronic fatigue as a purely psychiatric or vague, untreatable condition, requiring psychological management rather than true physiological repair. The broader implications of the Japanese warnings extend far beyond national borders. They provide a critical roadmap for the global health crisis. The Japanese experience serves as a powerful microcosm of what happens when a culture prioritizes industrial efficiency and corporate profit over ancient wisdom and preventative health. They were the canary in the global coal mine. What can we learn from the voices that were muted? We can synthesize their warnings into 3 core actionable principles. Principle 1: restore nutritional integrity. The doctors warned that the primary threat is not starvation, but poisoning through cheap processed calories. Their advice was simple: eliminate industrial seed oils, dramatically reduce refined sugar and artificial additives, and return to whole traditional fats and fermented foods that support the gut microbiome. They emphasized that health starts in the kitchen, not the pharmacy. Principle 2: demand environmental purity. The warnings about endocrine disruptors and low-level chemical exposure were severe. The Japanese doctors called for a radical reassessment of plastic use, water filtration standards, and chemical agricultural practices. They urged the public to reduce their personal chemical burden by scrutinizing household cleaning products and cosmetics. They saw these micro-exposures as cumulative, the long-term poison that creates the conditions for chronic disease decades down the line. Principle 3. Reclaim medical autonomy. The most powerful message suppressed was the idea that the individual holds the key to their own health, not the doctor, and certainly not the pharmaceutical corporation. The Japanese dissidents encouraged patients to ask critical questions. Is this drug masking a symptom? What is the root cause? Can this condition be reversed through diet and lifestyle change? They sought to empower patients to become active participants in their healing rather than passive recipients of prescriptions. The silencing of these Japanese voices was effective because the warning they delivered was not just about health. It was an existential threat to the trillion-dollar industry built upon ill health. The establishment could tolerate doctors who treated symptoms, but they could not tolerate doctors who cured root causes, especially with affordable, non-patentable methods. The tragedy is that the knowledge they tried to share, meticulously documented, proven over generations, is precisely the knowledge desperately needed today as the world grapples with unprecedented levels of autoimmune disease, metabolic syndrome, and mental health crises. Their legacy, though suppressed in the official narratives, lives on in the underground movement of integrative practitioners globally, who are now using the very principles these Japanese pioneers championed decades ago. If you believe in the power of truth and the importance of remembering these silenced warnings, please consider subscribing to this channel. We are dedicated to amplifying the stories that powerful forces want you to forget. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this urgent message. The forgotten Japanese doctors understood a fundamental truth. The greatest weapon against the diseases of modernity is not the latest technology or the most expensive drug. It is the wisdom of the past, applied with the rigor of modern science. Their warning was not just a health alert, it was a plea for humanity to reject the path of industrial convenience and reclaim the sovereignty of our biological selves. They warned us that a life lived in chemical convenience is a life lived in chronic sickness. They warned us that true health independence is antithetical to corporate profit. And they warned us that the price of ignoring the quiet wisdom of tradition would be paid in the currency of pain, suffering, and lost potential across generations. Though they were silenced, the truth they fought for is echoing now louder than ever in the rising tide of global chronic disease. It is time we listened to the quiet wisdom of the East before the silence becomes permanent. This is not just history. This is our final call to action. Take the lesson. Change your life. Because the warning they delivered decades ago is now our lived reality.